Dear LP's colleagues, dear Vasco, thank you very much for this kind virtual invitation. My video article is about the state of health emergency in France due to the COVID-19 and the marginalization of Parliament. We are at war. These words were pronounced on Monday, the 16th of March, by the French President of the Republic, Emmanuel Macron, who called for national unity against an invisible enemy called coronavirus or COVID-19. In France, the management of this crisis has deprived the Parliament of its already weak power. In particular, the two key measures, namely general lockdown and health emergency, were taken only by the executive. The crisis is from the beginning managed by the President Macron and his Prime Minister Edouard Philippe. In particular, a decree requires the 16th of March general lockdown for all inhabitants and suspends most of the civil liberties. This decree is based on the traditional case law of administrative courts about exceptional circumstances. Paradoxically, the first round of municipal elections is maintained just the day before. The executive has decided to cut in half these elections. That's why the second round took place at the end of June. The local democratic process has thus been interrupted. Then, the executive decided what was not necessary to give legal basis to the decree with the emergency statutory law of the 23rd of March to face the COVID-19 epidemic. An emergency law, that means a law adopted after an accelerated procedure. This text is certainly democratic because it is passed by the deputies and the senators and because it provides that both houses of parliament shall be informed about the measures taken by government and shall be able to require any further information. Two committees of inquiry were set up meanwhile in June, one in the National Assembly, that means the Chamber of Deputies, and one in the Senate. But it is not clear whether the parliamentary majority under the grip of the President of the Republic will contribute to publish a critical report concerning the management of the crisis. Anyway, the impacts of such parliamentary reports are always very limited. This law, this statutory law of March, raises furthermore problems of form and substance. On the form, the bill is passed precipitously and under exceptional conditions. Article 46 of the Constitution is violated, but the constitutional judges don't reject the law on the ground that the circumstances are particular. What is a problem in terms of democracy and rule of law? On the substance, the bill enacts a new state of emergency, the state of health emergency, which should be in principle different from the security emergency dealing with terrorism, for example. But the health emergency increases the powers of the Prime Minister and of the Minister of Health and affects intensively the rights and freedoms without giving any proper solution in terms of public health. The members of Parliament are empowered to vote only after 1 month in order to extend it or not. That means that French Prime Minister has nearly full decision-making power during the health emergency. By the way, Edouard Philippe and his ministers legislated by more than 30 ordinances. The government has been therefore criticized. That's probably why deputies and senators were invited to vote about the gradual deconfinement planned by the executive. The Senate voted against it, but these votes, according to Article 50 indent 1 of the Constitution, these votes have only symbolic value and do not make any decision. The gradual deconfinement runs therefore since the 11th of May. Moreover, the health emergency that was supposed to last for 2 months is extended by another emergency statutory law, a law adopted after an accelerated procedure in May. The Constitutional Council has partially censored the law in an elliptical decision in which the judges don't really play their role as watchdog of civil liberties. Lastly, a third emergency law to organize the health emergency recovery or way out is passed by the Parliament in July. The exit, the way out, except in Guyana and in Mayotte, where the virus is very active, the way out is also gradual from the 10th of July until the 30th of October 2020. That means that the executive is still allowed to take measures restricting freedom of movement or freedom of assembly, for example. In other words, the Act therefore maintains a kind of implied state of emergency. And one may ask whether we will be one day able to return to an ordinary law state. Meanwhile, the Minister of Health changed in February, as well as the Prime Minister early July. The President Macron appointed Jean Castex as Prime Minister, a senior official who was completely unknown to the public. Emmanuel Macron is consequently more than ever sole master aboard. The COVID-19 epidemic reinforces the concentration of power in his hands. The phenomenon is notably illustrated by the fact that the president manages the crisis within the framework of the Defense Council met in June and July for this purpose. Then the president decides on his own on what action to take. But on the one hand, the role of this council is not to participate to the management of a health crisis. And on the other hand, the final decision should be up to the legislator in a parliamentary system like the French one. Finally, the health crisis reveals that neither the parliament nor local democracy can fight against the super presidentialism in France. In other words, it reveals the lack of democratic checks and balances and the political and institutional malfunctions of our Fifth Republic. The other conclusion that could be drawn is that the war terminology, the declaration of a state of emergency, and the management of the crisis within the framework of the Defense Council are maybe not appropriate to resolve public health issues. In fact, the marginalization of Parliament and the war metaphor cover up the failures and contradictions in the management of the crisis. For example, protective masks were considered unnecessary when there was a stockout, and they are now mandatory in certain places since the stocks are recovered. The coronavirus pandemic is severe, and I just hope that the European institutions will make the right choices and that the European Parliament, unlike French counterpart, will have a full part to play in this crisis. Thank you very much for your attention. Bye bye.